This is the show dedicated to raising up the next generation of men of faith and character. My name is Mark Stanifer. Welcome to the Next Men Up. Well, hey guys, welcome back to the show dedicated to raising up the next generation of men of faith and character, because when that happens, everyone benefits. I'm your host, Mark Stanifer, and today we are going to finish the conversation with Rich Johnson around race and racism. If you haven't yet listened to part 1, I encourage you to start there. That way part 2 will make more sense. As I said last time, Rich is a husband, father, pastor, and someone who speaks strongly and compassionately into this topic. He is a black father raising boys who will become black men, all of which gives him a perspective and a voice that is worth listening to. Okay, I've already said enough. Let's just get right to it. Here's part 2 of my conversation with Rich Johnson. So how do you talk about this with your boys? When you're watching current events, when you're seeing what's going on, obviously the last 4 weeks have had plenty on display.
Sure.
Kicked off in Minneapolis, but spreading around the globe. How do you talk to your boy at this time?
So the other side, I mentioned like the historical way in which to see these things. The other is your worldview. And I'm a follower of Jesus, and I disciple my kids towards that end as well. And so when we read Scripture, I read it through the lens of the ethnicity that is present in Scripture. So if we're looking at, his sister is being changed into a pillar of salt, like, or being not, her appearance is being changed. What is that all about? Well, Moses married this black woman that his sister didn't approve of, and so what happens is she gets changed white. Leprosy is almost like this play on colorism, right there, and she's healed and restored, of this leprosy that she receives. So when we're reading Scripture, we're actually also reading it through the lens of ethnic and cultural differences. John 4 meets with a woman at the well. It's not simply a woman at the well. It's a Samaritan woman, which is cross ethnicity. I mean, that the two were not supposed to get along with one another. They're supposed to hate each other, right? So he crosses multiple boundaries, and I want to point that out to. And so I'm preparing them. Hey, how do you engage in this world? Like practically, you boys, all my children run. They run on a track team. They run in our neighborhood. If you're in Ahmaud Arbery's situation, when you're running through our neighborhood, which we send you out to go do, if someone comes up to you with a gun, this is not the time to defend your life. I need you home. And so I have to go through each one of these situations with my children because they're all different. If you're in your home and you hear someone come barging through, you're fully within your right to defend yourself. But it may also go another way where it was the police and it wasn't a robbery or a break-in. I want you to know that your life still matters and what you did is the right thing, even if you get criminalized out in the public. And hey, I hope that you would make the come home. My daughter is that you come home. We want you to come home and do the very best to maintain dignity at the same time. Because what Ahmaud Arbery had Ahmaud Arbery been alive still today, he'd still be facing the trauma of what it is that his blackness was a threat to other people that caused some other people to come chase him down with a weapon, with a gun, not just any kind of weapon. So there's trauma with that. Yes, you're alive. Woo, great. But there's a trauma now, and you actually go through losing a bit of your dignity in the midst of that. And so my boys know that they can ask me about anything. We have scheduled time when we're discipling, one another. And we were actually we're reading through the Bible, and we were at some other place in the Old Testament. And they were like, "Look, can we not read tonight? We want to talk, about what's going on." And we can do that. We can talk. But these are also not new conversations for us. When my boys turn 12, they have required reading. They're required to read Roots by Alex Haley and the autobiography of Malcolm X, also by Alex Haley. They're required to read The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois. And I have a whole library of books for them to choose from that are historical and also books that are modern, that speak in more into the context of their generation. But those are required readings. How does this intersect with your faith? How does it intersect with your walk, with the Lord? And those are just for them. They're just for us. If they want to share them with other people, that's totally fine and up to them. But it's a process of preparing them before a situation happens. We're not just reactionary to these things, for us. I know we've seen this, and we've cultivated a narrative that puts us in place in the story from history to present, and to dream about what it will look like in the future. So I'm not raising militant folks. I'm not raising little militant African-American kids, for those who are, considering that as an idea or thought right now. Although if I was, it'd be certainly my prerogative, right? Because there is a world that just doesn't view them ideally in the sense that they were created beautifully and wonderfully made.
Yeah.
So I'm raising them out of the love of God, but and also to understand what you're up against. When James speaks in the New Testament book of James, hey, you guys love God. I heard you say that, but you hate your brother. So actually, you don't really love God,
right?
Because God is actually in the face of the brother you say that you hate. You don't.
There's
love.
dissonance.
There's a major cosmic dissonance there,
Yeah.
And so let's bring that together. So hey, I can't say to my children, you love God, but you hate other people. Like, that's inconsistent. God is reflected in all of our bodies, not just some of our bodies. So we have to cultivate the spirit of love and belovedness, which is important, for me to understand who we are and what we're called to give, to other people.
I think the big awareness for me over the recent past, and I don't know how our listeners shake out on this spectrum, whether this is new for them or they're in the thick of it trying to make a positive impact. Worry about them coming home. It's not because they're going to get run into the jail or they're going to get lynched, so to speak. It's because they're going to have a car accident or they're going to get injured or something like that. Like, I don't have to think about the components of this that you, as a black man, black father, have to.
Right. Yeah, that's we all have as fathers, the opportunity to have the talk, sex talk.
Right, right.
And additionally, I also have the space. I think it's a non-negotiable requirement to have the race talk. But it's also something that I think today introduces the opportunity for all of us to have the race talk with our children.
That's right.
Not just if you're an African-American father raising African-American children. So even white fathers, even Asian-American, Chinese-American fathers, hey, we all can be having this conversation about race because it affects us all. We're only talking right now about a black and white issue of race, but man, there's so much more in between there with immigration, with these layers and values on whose bodies mean more, just puts us against one another. It puts us against one another to the degree that it never was intended to be from the beginning of creation or the beginning of time, if you will, but gets worked out in our social systems here, particularly in the West and even more specifically in the United States. Like, we don't really track historically with the fact that all white people weren't really white. Irish, if you have Irish in your background, you weren't considered white when you first arrived to this country. You were actually considered really bad words and names that would be too inappropriate, to mention on the airwaves, because they saw them as less than. And how the government was oppressing them in the job place and in the housing market in particular. They caught wind of it and said, well, we got to figure this out. And so overnight, Irish people are considered white, which then gives them an opportunity for better jobs, better land, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, Eastern Europeans had to go to court to petition to be white so that they could own land, join politics, get further education, and obtain loans and so forth. Because only white people could. White people don't even understand how deeply it's affected them. Historically, Irish folk, I'm sorry, y'all weren't considered white. You were associated actually a slight hair above African Americans. You were an indentured servant and slave actually in the earliest times when you arrived in this country, and they thought that's probably where you're going to be the rest of your life because that's how they identified you. But white people today don't know much about their history. What I tell a lot of white folks today is I think one of the most important things you can do is get out the family tree and see how far you can go back in your genealogy and understand where your family comes from. What parts of Europe do they come from, or South America? Hey, where does my whole family come from? And then as you do that, also look at what they had to give up in order to survive being in America. People had to give up last names, first names, so that they could be socially acceptable in this country. Man, there's a loss for that. There's a loss of identity for coming and being in the world. There's things that every culture has been able to give as a gift to the world that gets lost for the sake of e pluribus unum. All being, you can taste all of the flavors and they rub off on each other and it all just makes something really good and delicious. Let's be a gumbo, not a melting pot. I think one thing I'd like to just emphasize here of importance is that all Black people aren't experiencing this moment the same. We're experiencing it quite differently. We all don't see it the same. We all don't think the solutions are the same. What we say in that regards is that the Black community is not a monolith. There's not. We don't all experience it, see it, or believe the solutions are the same. For one, we all don't come from the same community. As I relate to this, is quite different from where we are recording this, just north of the Linden community, which is a highly impoverished community, which has a lot of complexity to it, particularly for people of color and African American in particular. The experience that Black people live with there is different from mine, where the opportunities are different, the experiences are different, the worldview and the value system is different. And how I've been able to navigate in this white world is to a greater skill level than perhaps many folks in a community like Linden. So there's not just one way in which to see this. And I see this reflected even in my own children. My oldest son wants to go to Morehouse College, just like I did, which is so he wants to go to a historically Black college. The way he sees the world is through this filter of himself as a young African-American boy. And his light skin is an advantage. That if he were in a position similar to George Floyd, because he's middle class, because he has lighter skin, because he's not the same height and stature as, say, a George Floyd, and probably won't ever be because his dad is 5'5", does that give him, quote unquote, an advantage for surviving in a world where George Floyd ends and life ends in death, and his would possibly end in life? He wrestles with that. My second son, he doesn't want to go to Morehouse College. He doesn't want to go to historically Black college at all anywhere. He wants to go to Stanford University. Like, where did that come from? Right. I have absolutely no idea. But, he picked one of the most expensive schools in the country, and we are taking donations
right, exactly.
To pay that off.
We'll post your GoFundMe link at the end of the show.
Thank you, Mark. And when you ask him what his second choice is Oxford. Not Oxford of Ohio, where Miami University is. No, he wants to go to
the Oxford
across the pond.
Yeah.
I'm like, where does this come from? Whose child are you? And both of them, we have the same expectation. When you turn 12, we're going to start getting into classic readings and works that are unique to the Black community, because you're not getting that in school. You're not getting that history in school. And Black History Month is relegated to a few contributions of the same names and people we hear over and over again. We're much more than just the contributions that we bring to the table. And so they're both getting the same at-home education and still processing that differently.
Yeah.
That's two bodies right there. My third son wants to be a police officer. He's wanted to be a police officer ever since he could start talking, and you start asking him, what do you want to be when you grow up? And so even now at this age of 11, soon to be 12, he wants to be a police officer. We don't deter that, from him. As parents do, we want to help find the gifts in our child and affirm them, the dreams they have. Becomes a police officer by the grace of God, that he is a police officer who maintains not only his dignity, but the dignity, of others.
Yeah.
My daughter's not quite sure what she wants to do yet.
She's got some time.
She's got some time. Now, her mother went to Hampton University, which is another historically black college. And so she's, of course, trying to convince my daughter to go that route. So, but we're all seeing this differently.
Even in the same family.
Independence Days in America. One we're very familiar with, July 4th, Independence Day. Woo, 1776. And in the year 1776, there were approximately 4 million Africans held as slaves. So that independence and freedom was not for everyone. Mm-hmm. The other Independence Day is June 19th, 1860. And in our family, we talk about both of them. Here's the independence of America from England, and then here's the independence of them. They are African American. There is this sort of challenge in what am I mostly identified as? Informed of their cultural identity apart from God and Christ. But when you pour Christ into your cultural identity, man, it does even more to enhance you. So I was a son and daughter of Rich and Shala Johnson. I'm a beloved son and daughter of God, who is the son of Rich and Shala. And this actually, when we understand who we are, we can affirm for others who they are as well. You're a gift. You're a gift in the unique way that you've been made. And the cultural experiences that have shaped you are not all who you are. They're actually who you are becoming on the way who you were intended to be. And so all of us have that in our background. We're destined for even more than what we experience right now.
What would you say to that listener, particularly to that dad who wants to be in the mix and wants to be a better man, set the bar high for himself and for it's maybe through the Jesus lens, right? Like all of those things. What would you say to that listener?
Well, I would first say, one, prepare yourself for a long journey, as you have described, and we talked early on. There are a lot of terms that we may not be familiar with, and there's a lot of history that ones may not have understood. And so there's a long journey to this. I think first prepare yourself for the long journey by giving yourself some grace to just take it slow. Don't try to read every book, watch every video, listen to every podcast and talk and journey with you. Hey, we're going to go on a journey together. So in the same way that you might read a book together, or watch a movie together and discuss who you identify with in the movie, and do this kind of work together as well. I would say to begin with Black authors, and so there's quite a bit of more research, better research about how this conversation about race uniquely affects white people. And certainly read those books. I think those would be very helpful. But I would also encourage you. Black folks have been having this conversation for a very long time, and so there is something to learn from Black authors, both from our history as well as our present, as a way to begin. That's the most culturally distant way that we can start to bring things forward. I understand quite well that when I have conversations with white people about this, I'm not automatically trusted, because they would expect me to say that there was racism. They would expect me to say that there was racial injustice or implicit bias, and et cetera, et cetera. They don't necessarily expect to hear it from another, white person. And if they do, then they're considered leftist or liberal or, what have you. And so there are some things to learn from other white folks. And I would say, hey, you can Google those things, and there's some great books out there. I can make some recommendations for you as a place to start. But if we start with the aspect of humility, I have something to learn here. I actually don't know everything there is to know about race. I actually don't know there is to everything to know about history. So I'm gonna learn this through the lens and experience of somebody else. That takes a great deal of humility, and fathers, I think, could model that really well for their sons. Hey, we're gonna have a humble approach in how we engage this issue, from the respect and regards that we don't know everything, and there are people who know more than we do. There's actually some people maybe who think differently than we do, and it's okay to engage in dialogue with them and take a posture of humility so that we can learn and be better informed. And I think we're going to particularly do that with regards to learning our history, our own history as a family. I think that's another great thing you can do as a father. I actually do our family tree with my boys. And so I want you to get to know your grandfather and your great-grandfather and your great aunts and great uncles, and where we came from, Mississippi and North Carolina and West Virginia, and all that of who makes you who you are today. That's a regular conversation I have, with my children. That'd be another great place to start. Hey, son, I want us to look at our history together. I want to look at our past together and see what we can discover. Take your son on a journey and on an exploration about, your history. So do it humbly, do it historically, and probably the hardest part is to do it honestly. As you become aware of these things, is to be honest about what you see and to say what you see. There's quite a defense wall that comes up in this conversation.
That's right.
Which humility helps to break down, and some history helps to inform, but then we still have to be honest. When all the walls are down, it's like, what do you see? You still have an opportunity to accept what you see or reject it. Inspection. And then go have that conversation with the black friend that you have, the black neighbor, the black coworker, or so forth. Maybe even the black person you say, they really are my friend. But I question how deep the friendship is on whether or not you've had this conversation with that friend. And I think it's meaningful. And I think 9 times out of 10, if you ask that black friend how close, seen for our color, but our color forms the way in which we see the world. And we do want to share that with our friend in any other way that we want to share experiences like camping or biking or running. I want to share an experience with you. And when I share this experience with you, I want you to say back to me, man, I've never seen it that way before. And that values and validates the experience of that friend who is a person of another color.
Yep.
Just like I have a friend from Morrow County, Ohio. I mean, it's country as all get out. And we've been camping out there before. And the first time I went camping, I told all my black friends, man, if I don't come back, here's where I'm going. Black folk don't usually do this camping thing, man. And, I had to borrow everything, tent, sleeping bag, and so forth and so on. I had the most beautiful time sitting under the stars and skeet shooting and drinking beer and smoking cigars, things that I enjoy doing today because this friend introduced them to me in a way that was valuable for him and his family. Like, man, so I love going down, skeet shooting, and I love going down paintballing and having some deep dish, pizza and sleeping under the stars. Those are maybe something that's held culturally in one people group, but it's meant to be shared with everybody, and everybody can actually experience something good from that. In the very same way, we can experience that by learning about African American culture and experiences and the way in which we process the world. And not in a culturally appropriative way, but in a genuine way in which we value this cultural experience as something that we include in our own family.
Back to that learning and humility and just being open, right?
Yeah. So we really do. We camp now. I got my own camping stuff.
Nice. I
got my own gear. We go camping as a family. Sometimes we go with grandparents and in-laws, and we have 15, 16 people out there camping together up in Put in Bay and anywhere else we can find. So we enjoy it. It's not just something that white people do. Now it's something that the Johnsons do. The Johnsons go camping now. Johnson's go hiking. You know what? Yeah, and I tell them black men like, "What you doing? What man? You doing what? Hey, what you?" It's like, yeah, I've gained an experience, and actually something that I love and I enjoy, and you should come with me. Matter of fact, next time we go hang out, let's go for a hike. Let's go for a walk. See what we see, what we experience together. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
I told you this before we recorded, that you've been significantly influential, even in a short period of time in my life. And I'm really grateful that you're willing to bring that to our listeners here. It's a topic that some of us are seeing perhaps for the first time, even though you've been living this for your entire 40 plus years.
Yeah.
And so thank you for just bringing that and for helping us to be smarter and inviting us into a deeper conversation where we can grow and we can learn and we can see what is, even if we don't like it, we can see what is, starting with that awareness, right? And then we can move toward, okay, now how can I be better? How can I do better? How can I make an impact?
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you to all your listeners. I wish the best to everybody as you engage in this journey.
Challenged by what Rich had to say and are inspired to be and to do better. And I hope the question you're asking is, what should I do with what Rich has just shared? For those of you who are readers, there's a resource document attached to this episode that you can download and begin working through. And there's a lot there. So as Rich said, don't try to digest it all overnight. Prepare to play a longer game here. Also, if you want to follow Rich, you can find him on Instagram at Rich Johnson Online, or you can learn more about the church and the work that he's doing there through the church website, sanctuarycolumbus.com. And as always, if you have any feedback for us, you can get us at our email address, feedback@thenextmanup.com, or follow us on Facebook at NMU Journey. However, wherever, we'd love to hear from you. Okay, guys, that's all for now. Until next time, adios. Hey, listeners, thanks for journeying with us on this Next Man Up podcast. You know, we would love to hear from you. Maybe you have a question or an idea, perhaps a topic for us to consider. If that's you and you want to reach out to us, you can get us at feedback@thenextmanup.com. That's feedback@thenextmanup.com. Again, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, we'll see you later.